without understanding the control framework that the organization is using, the facilitator can't help the team assess if the control is actually working or not. So here the first concept is about understanding the 3 lines of defense model. They say there are 3 lines of defense inside the organization. The first line of defense is actually the internal control, or what we call it management control sometimes. So management control and internal control is the first line of defense. Now, in case the internal controls are not working or someone was able to override the internal controls, we have the second thing. We have the compliance, we have the risk management, we have the inspection. This is what we consider the second line of defense. Now, if someone is not actually within the compliance, he's not following the risk management, now internal auditors will come as the third and final internal line of defense inside the organization. If internal auditors couldn't discover what happened, now external auditor is, we consider them, you know, the first line of defense outside the organization, and after that regulators will discover what happened. So this is the main concept of 3 lines of defense. We need to understand that for the organization to achieve its objective, they need to have effective corporate governance. So what is the definition of corporate governance? They say the definition is the combination of processes and structures. So it's a processes. What's the meaning of processes? Policies, standards, procedures, guidelines, code of conduct, code of ethics, all these are processes, as well as the structure. What do they mean by the structure? It's the relationship between the board of directors, the audit committee, the external auditor, the internal auditors, the shareholders. This is all, you know, the structure implemented by the board to inform, direct, manage, and monitor. So corporate governance, the simple definition for it is the following. It's the strategic direction and oversight that will help the organization achieve its objective by informing, directing, and managing and monitoring the activity of the organization to achieve its objectives. Who is responsible for corporate governance? Board of directors are responsible for corporate governance. So, what is the responsibility of corporate governance related to internal auditors? Well, internal auditor activity must assess and make appropriate recommendation for the improvement of governance processes, and they can do that by looking at the following objective, by following the following objectives. What are they? Promoting appropriate ethics and value within the organization. They need to ensure that, you know, the ethics and the values are promoted inside the organization, so everyone is working toward achieving the goals of the organization. Number 2, ensuring effective organizational performance management and accountability. If the board of directors is not accountable, if top management is not accountable, who is going to steer the organization toward the right direction to achieve its objective? As well as communicate risk and control information to appropriate areas within the organization, coordinate the activities and communication of the information among the board, external, internal auditors, and management. So it's all about the coordination, it's all about the communication. Again, who's responsible for corporate governance? We say the board of directors is responsible. What they are responsible for? They are responsible for doing the oversight. They need to establish oversight responsibility and ensure they are conducting that by making sure the management is doing whatever they should and sending internal auditors to audit them to provide assurance to the board of directors. If you remember what happened to Robert Maxwell when he died, they discovered that his company, he got total assets of 2 billion and total liabilities of 4 billion. How that happened? How an organization is surviving where they have 2 billion liabilities more than their assets? Well, he was the chairman and CEO at the same time, so he had full control over the organization. This is where we want to ensure board of directors, they have control over the organization, not the top management. Board of directors, they need to have the appropriate knowledge and expertise to run the business. You can't bring a musician and put him on the board of directors for a financial company and you say now you are effective in running the operation. You need someone who got knowledge of the industry background to help and advise the top management on running the organization. So now we come and move from corporate governance to internal control. What is the definition of internal control? Well, we say internal control is a process affected by the entity board of directors, management, and other personnel. So internal control process is what is the responsibility of everyone inside the organization, and it's designed to provide reasonable assurance. There's no absolute assurance to the achievement of the objectives related to operation, reporting, and compliance. So what is the control process? If someone will ask you what is the control process is 5 steps. The first one, establishing standards. You need to come for work for 8 hours. That's standards. Number two, measuring the performance. Are you working 8 hours a day or 7.5? Then analyzing the gap. If we discover that you are working 7.5, not 8 hours, we need to understand why. And if we discover that because your work is actually, there's traffic and every day you are coming a little bit late because of that, we need to decide, are we going to change the standard and say, okay, well, in that way, you are allowed to work 7.5 hours a day. Or we are going to say, no, you need to change your performance to meet the standards. So this is what we call the control process. Remember, there's a big difference between control process and control activity. Activity is focusing on fixing certain things at certain point. Process is focusing on how can we ensure the whole process is done. How can we establish the standards, measure the performance, and always make sure that we are following the standards. Who is responsible for internal controls? We say board of directors. Responsible for what? For oversight. Senior management, they are responsible for what? Establishing the internal control. We have the management, they are responsible for what? They are responsible for implementing the internal control. And we have the internal auditor, they are responsible for evaluating, testing the internal control. So now we say, what about the audit committee? What is their role here? They are coordinating the activities. So this is more their role here. What is the definition of control activity? We discussed what is the definition of control process. Control activity is what? We say any activity, control activity is any action taken by management, board, and other parties to manage risk and increase the likelihood that established goals will be achieved. So this is what it's an activity. The lock on your door is an activity. So now, for us to implement controls inside the organization, controls can be two kinds. They can be hard control as well as soft control. They can be formal control as well as informal control. So hard control, they are written policy and procedures. They are formal control. Soft controls, they are the culture, the norms, the values inside the organization. We call them informal controls. Which one do you think is easiest to audit for us as internal auditors? Hard controls or soft controls? Well, the answer is definitely hard controls. Why? It's written policies. We go and look at the operation and look and see if they are following these written policy and procedures or not. It's easy for us to audit it. For that, we say for us to audit hard controls, we start with understanding of the organization structure. We need to understand exactly what is the structure in the organization. What are the policies, standard, procedures, and guidelines that in the operation they need to follow. What are the reporting and responsibility there, and what is the internal reviews that they have in place. These are the formal controls that usually organization will have. Now for us, when we are looking at the informal control, we are looking at the organization culture, norms, ethics, attributes, values, morale, tone at the top. So now this is where control self-assessment is much more effective in providing us assurance over the informal controls, where internal audit is actually over the hard controls. So how can we do audit of hard controls? Well, we say there are four things. The first thing we say, is the control exists or doesn't exist? For example, a warehouse. Do we have control over the warehouse? If they said no, so in that way, it's very easy. We say, now you don't have it, you need to have it, so you need to establish an internal control. So if it's existing, the next step we say, is it adequate? We say, what control do you have over the warehouse? Do you have? They say, yes, we have. I say, what do you have? They say, we have a cat. I say, cat? Meow? It's not going to help us. So in that way, what we need to do, we need to ensure that you have adequate internal controls. Now, if they said, yes, we have adequate internal control, we have a security guy standing there, security guard. So I say, great, security guard, is he working? They say, what do you mean working? I say, is he there 24 hours? They say, no, he is there for about 10 hours, then he will leave for 2 hours, then another guy will come for 10 hours. I said, wow. So in that way, we have 2 hours gap in the morning and in the night. Now the control is not working. You need to fix the control. Now, if they said, yes, we have a security guard working 24 hours guarding the warehouse, I need now to do tests of internal control to see if it's working. So the first two things, if it exists and adequate, we call it the design of the control. And the second two things, working and effective, we call it, the control is actually the functioning of the control. So is the control designed adequately and functioning effectively? This is how we do the testing for the hard controls. Now for IIA, what IIA will say, the standards, they say internal audit activity must evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness. See the adequacy, the design and effectiveness, the functionality of the controls in responding to risk within the organization, governance, operation, and information system regarding the reliability and integrity of financial and operational information. So to achieve the reporting objective, the effectiveness and efficiency of the operations and the programs for operational objectives, safeguarding of assets, safeguarding objectives, and compliance with the law and regulations and policy. So these are the areas we examine here. Now, there are some controls inside the organization that can be manual control, and we have some controls that can be automated control. So for automated control, what we need to do, we can test the controls in two ways. We can do compliance, which is what we call control testing. So we test the controls to verify whether controls are being applied according to the policy and the procedures. And we can do as well as substantive testing, transaction testing, to test the error in the system to ensure that the internal control, the transaction went through internal control are done in the right way. For us to do testing, we can do compliance testing, substantive testing, as well as we can apply analytical audit procedures. So if we don't want to test the internal controls, if we don't want to go do substantive testing, another way for us is to do analytical audit procedure, which is comparing financial and non-financial information to look for any differences that are not expected, or absence of differences when they are expected, or errors or unusual non-recurring transaction. For example, you can see number of employees went up, total number of salaries went down, question mark. Why this is happening? Total loans for the company went up, while the interest rate paid annually went down. The question mark, what's going on? So that way we are trying to analyze financial and non-financial information to be able to identify areas where we need to explore to understand what's going on there. So this is when we are auditing hard control. Now when we are auditing soft control, what we look at? We look at control self-assessment. We say people are making internal control work. They are the weakest link, so they understand exactly what's going on. Think about it. In your division, in your organization, you understand exactly what's going on more than anyone else. So you are more qualified to do that audit, to assess what's going on. Now, when we look at the controls, there are two kinds of control. There are discretionary controls and non-discretionary control. So discretionary controls are subject to human choice or judgment. So in that way, this is the control where someone will come to you and you look at the document and you say, yes, it's appropriate or it's not appropriate. We can do it or not based on so many judgments you are going to make based on that situation. And some controls, they are not. Non-discretionary control are provided automatically by the system and can be bypassed, ignored, or overridden. You are trying to log into the system. They need your username and password. You can't not enter your username and password to enter to the website. You have no other option. So this is discretionary control. You have to do it. You are trying to apply to renew your car license. You need to enter your car plates. If you don't enter it, they will not renew it. So these are discretionary control. You can't override these controls. Now, for any internal control, definitely there are limitations. What are the limitations of the internal controls? Well, the first thing is a human failure. A human can fail in implementing the control. Or we can say control failure. Sometimes the control itself can fail. Or the override of the control. Someone can override the control in place. This can happen sometimes through a collusion by management. Or an external event that can happen that will break your controls. So these are the things that will make you understand that controls will provide reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, because not all the time they are going to work. Now, what is the global known control framework related to implementing internal control inside your organizations? Called COSO, Committee of Sponsoring Organization, made out of these 5 organizations, AICPA, IMA, and IIA. They all work together and they created COSO, which is Committee of Sponsoring Organization, saying this is the internal control framework, which is latest one, 2013, that you need to follow to have effective internal control inside your organization. So what is the goal of COSO? Establish a common definition of internal control, as well as provide standards where organizations they can say, are we following the best practice? Are we following COSO as a control framework? Now, how can we use COSO in our control self-assessment? Well, you can start by understanding the control framework, which is COSO or whatever framework the organization is doing. Then determining the control strength and weaknesses in the organization based on looking at the operation in the control self-assessment workshop, and ask the participants, are we actually following these controls? Are these controls working effectively? Which one we have weaknesses in, which one they are working fine? And define the key issue and reportable condition related to the controls that they are not being implemented. And then we validate that by testimonial evidence, and then we make the final assessment and we decide what corrective action we can do to bring the controls to be working effectively in the area where they are weak. So for control self-assessment, COSO, they have 5 components that we focus on. We focus on control environment, where we look at the tone at the top, at the culture inside the organization. We look at the code of ethics. We look at all these things that made the control environment. Remember, control environment is the foundation for all the other elements. So if organization, they don't have control environment, they don't have actually controls. Then we look at the risk assessment. Are they assessing the risk? Are they identifying the risk first, assessing the risk, evaluating the risk? Then, if they are evaluating the risk and the risk is still high, are they implementing control activity to reduce the risk to the acceptable level? And then how they are communicating these internal controls and providing the information to the staff inside the organization, and how they are doing monitoring to ensure that internal controls are working as they should. And again, this is where we start looking at the objectives first, then saying, based on this objective, what are the risks that can be there and that will prevent us from achieving the objectives? Then we say what controls we need to have in place to manage this risk and reduce the risk to the acceptable level so we can achieve the objectives. What are the objectives we are speaking about? Like we said before, they are the operational, compliance, and financial reporting objectives. These are the main 3 objectives in COSO. Now remember, in 2013, COSO moved from being what we call it component-based to principle-based. And now it's really clear and it's easy for us to use it in control self-assessment to go over any elements of any components of COSO and go over the principle and point of focus and make sure everyone is understanding how this can be implemented in the organization. So now we have 17 principles and 5 components that we can go, and this is what is considered the internal control framework for COSO. Now for other internal control framework, we have COCO, which is the criteria of control committee. COCO is a very simple concept which is similar to COSO. It's saying, what is the purpose of implementing that control? How it's helping the organization? Do we have commitment and support from top management to be implemented? What about the capability? Do we have the capability to carry out this internal control and implement it? And are we going to take the action inside the organization to do it? Because without carrying the action, without implementing the control, nothing can happen. And finally, are we doing monitoring and learning to ensure that this control is working effectively? And if it's not, we are adapting, we are learning to make sure it's working effectively to achieve the goals of the organization. So again, it's purpose, commitment, capability, and action, monitoring and learning. This is the 5 components of COCO. Now, the control objectives for information and related technology, COBIT. This is where we moved to speak about IT controls. Remember, all our operation moved from traditional manual control to what we called IT control. Now, for that, we need to ensure that we have information technology control framework that's helping us and align what we call IT control with our what we call the internal controls. So in that way, this will highlight the control that are in the environment, will make sure that it will establish general control over our general business operation and ensure we have a framework that will help us ensure the business objectives are aligned, the IT objectives are aligned with the business objective, as well as the IT controls are aligned with the business controls. Now, what kind of technique we can use to determine and track and record how controls is performing inside the organization? Well, the first thing, auditor, they need to ensure that all material risk exposure has been identified and managed through controls. So in that way, this is where we use what we call risk control matrix, where we say what risk we have inside the organizations, what controls we have inside the organization, which control is managing which risk, and which risk is managed by which control. So this is where we identify that. Then determine whether the controls to prevent fraud are adequate. Do we have enough control to prevent fraud and to detect fraud inside the organization? Then we test the efficiency, effectiveness, economy of the control. Are they actually effective in achieving the goals? And then we identify and document the weaknesses and recommendations for improvement. And finally, we do the follow-up to ensure that the deficiencies are being corrected. So these are the things we do in control self-assessment workshop to ensure that the testing and documentation of the control they are being done. Now, when we start understanding the control framework for COSO, the first element of it is control environment. So understanding the control environment is very essential. Remember, control environment is part of it is the soft controls. Part of it is the testing that we do in COSO, where we are going to go and assess the culture, assess the ethics, assess how the organization is actually managing its operation. So this is where, how can we do that? Well, we can assess the control environment by identifying the control points in the process. So what's the meaning of control points? We have the process. The process, we take the process into activities. Inside the activities, we have certain control points that are providing us assurance that the risk is minimized in certain area. And this is where we test these control points to see, are they working effectively? Then we document our understanding of the control environment. We can write it in memorandum. We can have it in what we call internal control questionnaires. And in that way, we put all the control points and they say, are they working? Are they not? What's going on with them? So we can use that during the workshop. Or we can have a checklist and we say, are all this happening inside that activity related to control? We can have a flow chart where we identify the points of the control points and see if they are working effectively. So these are all ways for us to document and understand the controls for us to do testing later. Or we can use business mapping for us to understand the business and how the process is done inside the company. Or we can use control charts, which is very interesting, to have the lower limit and upper limit and see exactly, are the transactions happening above the upper limit or lower than the lower limit. So in that way we consider them deficiencies. Then we need to assess the level of control risk. What's the meaning of the level of control risk? How much is the control risk? The definition of control risk is the control is not working as it should be. So the meaning is the failure of the control. So is the control risk high? The meaning there is a huge chance of the failure of the control, or the control risk is low. Actually, the chances of failure is low. And finally, we communicate the reportable condition to management. So we tell them exactly what's going on. So this is the concept of assessing internal, the control environment based on COSO. Now, when we are implementing the controls inside the organization, it's very essential to understand what kind of categories of control we have. Well, they say we have different kinds of control. We have primary controls and we have secondary controls. So primary controls, they are like preventive controls. They are going to help us in preventing something from happening. Like when you are trying to come to your company, if you don't have company ID, you can't actually enter because the door was not going to open. That's preventive. Or we can have deductive control. So if someone actually in the supermarket stealing something and going with it, we will be hearing toot, 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 so someone will know that someone is actually stealing something. Or it can be corrective control. Like when you are typing on Google something, Google will correct it and tell you what's the correct thing. Or on Word, when you are typing something, it will say this is wrong. It will have something red under it and then it will give you the correct answer. Or it can be a directive control. The meaning of directive control is actually directing you to achieve the right thing, like policy and procedures, like the direction, the strategy that the company will implement, like the training. They are ensuring you are going to achieve the goals correctly upfront rather than correct you after. So they direct you toward the right direction. Now, sometimes in some organization, it's really expensive to implement primary control like segregation of duty, because we have only one employee and he's handling many transactions. And he's doing authorization and recording and custody, and he should not. So what is the solution? We implement secondary control, which is, we call it compensating control. So for the situation that I mentioned related to segregation of duty, we can have a review log, or we can have management review to ensure that even the person is doing all the tasks that need to be segregated, someone is reviewing his work to ensure it's okay. Or we can have complementing control. They complement the other controls that we have in place, the primary control. So in that way, they are providing us extra assurance. Understanding the control framework and the control components and how can you test and assess internal control is really essential for you when you are conducting control self-assessment.